Hey guys, welcome to the final companion podcast for the marvelous Mrs. Maisel, presented by The Disorderly. Please head to thedisorderly.com for the best in sports and entertainment. You can find us on Twitter at Disorderly Media, Facebook at Disorderly ENT, and you can find me on Twitter at Nick Risner, NickRizner. So we did it. We finished episode 9 and 10. I believe this is part 5, right? I think I split it up like that. In my quick one-word review of the marvelous Miss Maisel, fantastic. It's so good. So, going into this, it's December. I was coming up with my top 10 list for the year, best television shows. I haven't quite decided yet, but this thing really just skyrocketed it up. I loved season 1, so I was expecting it to be good. I was expecting it to be in my top 10, but I didn't know how high up. And I feel like season 2 was even better. I'm probably going to have this somewhere in the mix of the top 3. I'll discuss all of that in a future podcast, so don't worry about it. But it was just really good, man. I mean, I sound like a broken record, but there's so many things to love about this show. For example, in episode 9, the cold opening, it was so slick and fun. Also, somehow a more accurate look at how show business works than Entourage was. That's pretty impressive in its own right. But the show continues to surprise me. I mentioned in an earlier podcast, I was expecting this big climax moment when Benjamin finally watches Midge do stand-up for the first time. But then when it actually happens, you just see him in the back room laughing. Like halfway through one of our sets, they don't make a big deal out of it. That's it, as if he sort of fits right in, right? It wasn't a big change of dynamic, and I think that says more about their relationship than anything else, that it all just kind of works. And that was actually more satisfying than if they made a big thing about it. It was subtle. It was a very subtle way of doing it, but that made it more satisfying. Of course, this all takes place on the precipice of this huge moment for Midge. She just wrapped her tour. It was kind of a disaster, right? And now she's set to make an appearance on live television during a telethon. The twist comes when Sophie Lennon is on stage doing her same old tired act from season 1. She's kind of a hack, right? And the crowd seems to love it. But in addition to that, she also goes around the production and screws with all the stuff that Midge is going through. She sat Midge off camera, so she can't see her on TV. Her phone's disconnected for the telethon. They bump her set to the very end of the broadcast. Everything sort of works against her. Of course, as is sort of the case for this show, tragedy turns into triumph. And her authenticity, the same thing that makes her so different from Sophie Lennon, that's what ultimately makes her a star. So she knocks it out of the park, catches the eye of Shy Baldwin, who's a famous singer, and ultimately gets asked to go on tour with him. That's obviously the end of episode 10. So that all works out. But the true conflict doesn't really occur between Midge and Sophie. It takes place between Midge and her manager, Susie. And I may be a little slow in this, but this moment where they argue at the end of episode 9, that was really the first time I realized how much those two butted heads this season. I mean, as more and more people find out about it, more and more people meet Susie for the first time, the question kind of always arises, is she professional enough to be your manager? And this is going to be a really strange comparison that'll probably lose some people, but it's very similar to the UFC, right? A lot of crossover between UFC fans and Marvelous Miss Maisel fans, I'm sure. But for example, they have a president, Dana White, right? And Dana White is kind of this rough around the edges, loudmouth type president. And that's what the UFC needed at the beginning when they needed someone to fight battles and fight for respect in the sports industry and all this stuff. But now, once you reach a certain level of professionalism, there's kind of this debate, is it time to move on from Dana White? Do you need a more professional frontman to represent you? And that's similar to Mrs. Maisel. When she didn't have any respect, she needed Susie as a manager to represent her and kind of butt her nose into things and really bully people into listening to her. But now that she does have some momentum, does have some success, isn't it possible that she would benefit more from a more professional manager? And I think that's where this conflict takes place. That's why these two are butting heads now. Obviously, as we know, the way things work out in episode 10, Susie gets offered a management gig from Sophie, which that came out of nowhere, but that's interesting because she's had this professional manager, but ultimately this professionalism directly contradicts, the personal relationship that Susie and Midge have. And that's what Sophie wants. So she's actually looking to hire Susie as a manager, which we're left not knowing what her decision was with that. But that changes a lot of things, right? Because all of a sudden she has 2 clients instead of 1. There's bound to be some jealousy there. But at the same time, it's a big opportunity for Susie to manage one of the biggest comics in the world. So that's going to be a really interesting sort of story arc for season 3. And speaking of story arcs, there's a lot of really interesting story arcs setting up for season 3. That's one of my favorite things. So I think season 2 is much better than the first season. However, I'm not satisfied, right? I'm greedy. I want the third season to be even better. And that starts with sort of setting it up on a tee, getting people interested and excited for the next season. And I think they did a perfect job of that. So you have on one hand Susie, who has this managerial decision coming up. How about Abe, who I think Abe might have had one of the best story arcs of the entire season. I think his whole trajectory of his world, him being this really put together guy and his world sort of crumbling and falling apart, to see the flip of that, where he takes that and basically sabotages everything. He says he's going to leave that government job. He's going to leave his job as a tenured professor at Columbia, and he's going to go back to his days of sort of fighting the man. And he's going to start by hiring this old friend of his that's a lawyer. That's going to be interesting, too, to watch that sort of play out. Especially keep in mind that his son is still a government employee. So that's going to be, something to watch for in season 3. And then Joel, he announces that he has this plan to basically open up his own club. That's going to be interesting. Now, he's just talking. They're hitting the baseballs in the park. It's all words right now. But if the writers decide to carry on with the storyline, I feel like that's going to be a lot of fun to watch, especially to see how him being involved in the business sort of intertwines with Midge's career. That's going to be great. And of course, obviously, the biggest storyline of this entire thing is that Shai Baldwin asked Midge to go on this tour. Now, this is what I don't understand. I don't understand why going on a 6-month tour with Shai Baldwin automatically means that she can't be with Benjamin. Like, why not? It seems like he's been very accepting. He hasn't tried to hold her back at all. He's not... Like you look at Joel's relationship with Midge, and he said, if you're going to be a stand-up comic, then this thing's never going to work with us. But it seems like Benjamin's on board with it. So she didn't even talk to him. And it's not, obviously, it's intentional writing. This whole time she's having this huge moment. She runs, she tells her father, she tells her manager, she tells Joel. Obviously, the big moment is that it ends with them kissing. But she never talks to Benjamin about it. And it's interesting because I feel like his response would be that he's okay with it, right? Like, I wouldn't, he'd be like, all right, I'll see you in 6 months. Like, I'm sure he wouldn't be happy, but I think he'd be okay with it. But for some reason, she chooses to basically call off the engagement. I mean, she, like I said, she never said anything to him, but it seems like that's where it's going. And that surprised me. And I guess it's kind of a callback. Remember early in the season when she sees the masterpiece from that artist, and he says the only way to achieve true greatness is basically to give everything you have to your art. And that's how he created this masterpiece, but it also means that he's going to die alone. We see a callback to that, sort of, when you see Lenny Bruce do that whole musical number on the TV show about how he chose to pursue basically fame and fortune as opposed to a happy marriage and a kind of a pedestrian life. And she's having this realization. Both times she's talked to Lenny Bruce and this artist, people who she sort of respects. Obviously, Lenny Bruce, she has more of a relationship with. But those two people, she sees examples of people basically giving everything they have to their art. And I think she decides, I have to do the same thing. So yes, it's a 6-month tour, right? It's not the end of the world. But I think she knows that after this, there's going to be another 6-month tour. There's going to be another one and another one. If she really wants to achieve greatness in this industry, she can't have a normal life with a husband and kids and all that. Now, granted, she has kids, so that complicates things as well. But I don't know. And I think when all this chaos is swirling around her, I think what she wanted was something familiar, something that doesn't have implications of a future, really. And that's why she ends up with Joel again. I don't know. The show has such a profound way of sort of balancing the happy and the sad at all times. And this is a perfect example. Like, everything's going great, right? Almost every single character has this great thing on the horizon, something they're really hoping to achieve. And yet it was so sad watching her go back to Joel. She seemed really conflicted. She doesn't, know whether to be extremely happy or sad about the fact that she's basically choosing a lonely life. And that was amazing. This whole show is amazing, man. I think the Emmys will probably come rolling in again for season 2. And this seems like one of those shows that's going to keep happening every season because it's so well written, so well acted. It's really, there's nothing else like it right now on TV. And it's just the kind of show that makes me so happy that I watch television. I remember someone saying to me once that, TV's a waste of time. I've heard that, obviously, from a bunch of people. It's like a pastime. There's a difference between watching Big Bang Theory and really profound shows that make you think about things. I would say a show like this is almost more similar to being really into like Shakespeare back in the day or something like that. Really smart television is important. It gets the creative juices going. It makes you think about life and philosophy and things like that. It's art. It really is. This has always kind of been the case, but I feel like now more than ever, there's so many shows that are truly art, almost more than the movies out there these days. And Marvelous Mrs. Maisel is absolutely one of them. So great show. I hope you guys enjoyed this season as much as I did. I hope you enjoyed my companion podcast. We'll be doing more of these with upcoming shows. Off the top of my head, I know I'm going to do a Game of Thrones one, but that's not till April, I think. So there'll probably be something else before that. But yeah, still rate, review, subscribe. We're going to be coming out with the Sports Report podcast and doing a lot of more fun stuff on this podcast. So I hope you guys continue to be an audience for it. And for the final time this season, thank you guys for listening. Take care, guys.